My house in Atascadero is always quiet. Too quiet, to be honest. Sometimes I turn on the radio just to hear human voices. Eleanor, my wife, died 5 years ago, and silence has been my constant companion ever since. At 68, you get used to loneliness, though you can never fully accept it. My house is a simple one-story house with 3 bedrooms, a spacious living room, and a small garden in the back. It's nothing special to the outsider's eye, but to me, it's a whole world Eleanor and I have created over the decades we've lived together. Every corner holds memories. This is where she loved to read on Sunday mornings. This is where we put up the tree every Christmas. And the kitchen is where she experimented with recipes she cut out of magazines. After retiring from the school where I taught math for 43 years, I decided not to sit idle. I started giving private lessons to local school children, not so much for the money, but to keep my mind clear and feel useful. I now have 5 regular students ranging in age from 12 to 17. Some come of their own accord, others are sent by ambitious parents. In any case, I try to instill in them not only a knowledge of formulas, but also a love of logic and precision, which mathematics gives better than any other science. Mr. Royce, I still don't understand why we need sines and cosines in real life, says Marcus Tate, my most challenging student, drawing in his notebook instead of solving a problem. Do you understand why you need to be able to read? I ask, watching him scribble aimlessly. Of course, he looks at me like I'm crazy. To get information. Now, math is also a language. The language in which the entire universe is written. I take the notebook from him. And if you don't understand that language, you're missing out on the most interesting story there is. Marcus rolls his eyes, but he picks up his pencil and begins to solve the problem. I'm not offended by his skepticism. I was like that myself at his age, until I met a teacher who revealed to me the beauty of numbers. After school, the house falls into silence again. I make myself a simple dinner of scrambled eggs and toast and pour a glass of milk. The habits of a bachelor, as Eleanor would say. She always insisted on full lunches and dinners, even when it was just the 2 of us. Food isn't just fuel, Alistair. It's a whole ceremony, she was fond of saying. I realize now that she was right, but it's hard to change habits at my age. I spend my evenings on the computer playing online chess. Many people are surprised to learn that Old Man Royce has an account on chess.com with a rating of 1,840. In the virtual world, no one knows how old I am and does not judge by gray hair and wrinkles. All that matters here is your intelligence and strategic thinking. Tonight, I'm playing an opponent from Japan. Judging by the style of play, he is an experienced chess player who prefers the Caro-Kann defense. The game drags on for 40 moves, but in the end I emerge victorious by driving his king to the corner of the board. Good game, my opponent writes in chat before exiting. Likewise, I reply, feeling a slight sense of satisfaction. In moments like this, the loneliness recedes. I feel connected to another person, albeit through a computer screen on the other side of the planet. Eleanor called it the illusion of communication, but for me, it's better than nothing. Before I go to bed, I check the doors and windows as usual. A habit developed over the years. Even though crime is virtually non-existent in our quiet Atascadero neighborhood. Glancing at Eleanor's picture on the bedside table, I whisper, "Good night," and turn out the light. Sleep doesn't come immediately. In the quiet of the night, my thoughts involuntarily return to my son, Brock. He's 39, works for the city government in the planning department. Our relationship has long since become a formality. Holiday calls and occasional visits, usually with some important reason. What went wrong? When did the chasm between us become unbridgeable? Maybe when he dropped out of college after his sophomore year and I refused to fund his search for himself. Or when he brought Tams into the house and I had the temerity to point out that she seemed more interested in our house than Brock himself. Tamsin Royce, born Tamsin Price. Works at a local bank branch, customer service. Always dressed in the latest Atascadero fashions. Smiles at everyone but me. She has a special smile for me, polite but cold as a knife blade. Our last meeting was 7 months ago, on my birthday. They came with a gift, a sweater that I will never wear, too bright and youthful for a man of my age and temperament. Over dinner, the conversation inevitably turned toward home. "Have you ever thought about moving, Dad?" Brock asked in a casual way. "This house is too big for one man. And it needs constant upkeep," Tamsin said. "We've seen some great senior apartments near the center, with 24-hour medical supervision." "I'm not so senile that I need round-the-clock care," I replied dryly. "And no, I wasn't thinking of moving. This house is my home." "We're just worried about you," Brock said with that special intonation he uses when he wants to look like a caring son. "What if you fall or get sick? Who's going to help?" "I have a phone and neighbors." I cut off a piece of pie. "Let's change the subject." They looked at each other with that peculiar expression I'd learned to recognize. The old man is becoming unbearable. The rest of the evening passed in tense conversation about the weather and local news. Sleep still didn't come. I turned on the bedside lamp and pulled out a book, a biography of John von Neumann, one of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century. Reading always helped me take my mind off unpleasant thoughts. Suddenly the phone rang. The clock read almost midnight, too late for an ordinary call. My heart twitched with alarm. At my age, late calls rarely bring good news. Brock's number on the phone screen. "Alistair Royce," I answered, trying to keep my voice calm. "Dad." Brock's voice sounded strained. "We have a problem." "What's wrong?" I sat up on the bed, clutching the phone. "There's a fire in our apartment. It was the wiring. The fire department put it out, but, it's impossible to live there. Soot on the walls. Smell of smoke everywhere. Some of the furniture destroyed. Was anyone hurt?" That was my first question, my instinctive parental reflex. "No, we were at work. The neighbors called the fire department when they noticed the smoke," he said quietly. "Insurance will cover the repairs, but it'll take time. 2 or 3 weeks at least." I knew where he was going with this, and I braced myself for the inevitable question. "We have nowhere to go, Dad," he said after a pause. "All the hotels in the area are booked up because of the wine festival. I know we have a difficult relationship, but can Tamsin and I stay with you until the renovations are done?" I closed my eyes. The thought of my carefully constructed routine being disrupted was almost physically uncomfortable. Brock and Tamsin in my house for a few weeks. But how could I say no to my own son in a situation like this? "Of course," I said finally. "I have 2 spare bedrooms. When are you coming?" "Tomorrow morning, if you don't mind. Tonight we'll sleep at a friend's house." "Okay." I tried to keep my voice neutral. "I'll be home." "Thanks, Dad." He sounded genuinely relieved. "We really appreciate it." After the conversation, sleep finally disappeared. I got up, put on my robe, and walked through the house, mentally preparing myself for the changes the new tenants would bring. One of the guest bedrooms was used as storage for old books and boxes of Eleanor's things I'd never gotten around to sorting through. I'd have to clear it out in the morning. There was a bed in the second bedroom, but the linens needed changing. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water and looked out the window at the night garden. The shadows from the moonlight turned the familiar shapes into something mysterious and alien. A strange sense of foreboding swept over me, as if this night was the last night of a previous, peaceful life. "Don't be dramatic, Alistair," I said to myself. "It's only for a few weeks. We're adults. We'll get along under the same roof." But something told me that Brock and Tamsin's arrival would change more than just the routine of my days. In the morning, I woke up earlier than usual and went straight to getting the house ready. I cleared out one of the bedrooms by moving boxes into the garage, changed the linens, and dusted. About 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Brock and Tamsin stood on the doorstep. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. She kept a straight face with her usual detached smile, like she was doing me a favor by agreeing to stay at my house. "Hi, Daddy," Brock tried to smile. "Thank you for hosting us." "Hello, Alistair," Tamsin nodded. "I hope we're not disturbing your peace too much." They'd brought a lot more stuff than I'd expected for a temporary stay. Several suitcases, boxes of personal belongings, even Tamsin's houseplants. "Come on in." I stepped back, letting them into the house. "I've prepared both guest bedrooms, so take your pick." "Actually," Tamsin looked at Brock as if seeking support, "we'll need both. We'll use one as a bedroom and the other as a home office. I work remotely 3 days a week and Brock needs the document space." I raised my eyebrows but remained silent. Apparently they were planning on staying for a long time. "Suit yourself," I said finally. "Make yourselves comfortable. I'll be in the kitchen if you need me." While they unpacked, I made coffee and sandwiches. Hospitality wasn't one of my strong points, but I tried to be civilized. "Thanks for the coffee, Dad." Brock took the cup. "I apologize for the sudden intrusion. You can't imagine how awful it is to come home and see firemen outside your house." "I can imagine," I nodded. "The important thing is that no one was hurt. Things can be replaced." "Not all of it," Tamsin sighed. "My collection of designer shoes, 3 pairs completely ruined by the smoke, and they were limited edition." I looked at her, not knowing what to say to this tragedy. Eleanor had never been interested in designer shoes, preferring comfort to ostentatious glitz. "I hope the insurance covers the damage," I said neutrally. "It should," Brock nodded. "I've already contacted the company and they're sending an appraiser this week, but the repairs will take time anyway." "How long do you plan to stay?" I asked bluntly. They looked at each other. "It's hard to say exactly," Brock began cautiously. "At least 2 or 3 weeks, but it could be as long as 2 months. It depends on the scope of the work. 2 months. I felt my heart clench at the thought of my home, my sanctuary, being occupied for that long. But they were family, and they had no choice. "I understand." I nodded. "I hope we can get along." "Of course we can." Tamsin smiled her trademark smile, polite and cold at the same time. "We'll try very hard not to interfere with your habits, Alistair." I didn't believe a word she said, but I kept silent. There were weeks of living together, and I didn't want to start them with conflict. "I've made a little list of house rules," I said, handing them a piece of paper. "Nothing too complicated: quiet time, use of common spaces, my class schedule." Brock took the list with obvious distaste. "Dad, we're not children to follow a schedule." He tried to smile, but it was strained. "We're adults. We can regulate our own behavior." "Of course," I nodded, "but I prefer clarity from the beginning. It will help avoid misunderstandings." "We'll familiarize ourselves." Tamsin took the sheet from Brock's hands and put it on the table without looking at it. "Now, if you don't mind, I need a shower." It had been a very busy day. She retreated to the bathroom and Brock stayed with me in the kitchen. There was an awkward pause. "How are you, Dad?" he finally asked. "How's your health?" "Normal for my age," I answered. "My blood pressure is a little high sometimes, but nothing serious." "Do you see a doctor regularly?" "Every 6 months. The last one was in May." "Good," he nodded. "Tamsin and I are worried about you, living alone, no one to look after you." "I'm doing fine on my own," I interrupted him. "I have 5 students, I run online chess tournaments, I read books. I don't need supervision." "Online chess tournaments?" He looked surprised. "You play chess online?" "Why are you surprised?" I couldn't hide my annoyance. "That someone my age can still use a computer?" "No, it's just—" He hesitated. "I didn't know you were into chess." "There's a lot you don't know about me," I said quietly. "Like I don't know about you, I suppose." He looked at me for a long moment as if he wanted to say something but didn't. "I'm going to go unpack," he said finally. "Thanks for the coffee." Alone, I looked out the window at my half-abandoned garden. The rose bushes that Eleanor had once grown so lovingly were in need of pruning. The old apple tree was still bearing fruit against all expectations. This garden, like the house, was part of my life, my history. It's only for a few weeks, I reminded myself. Be patient, Alistair. They're your family after all. But somewhere in the back of my mind I felt anxious, like a storm was coming and I'd forgotten to close the windows. I woke up to the sound of furniture being moved. The clock read 7 a.m. Usually at this time the house was silent. Throwing on a robe, I walked out of the bedroom and headed toward the sound. In the living room, Brock and Tamsin were busily moving my couch to the opposite wall. "Good morning," I said, crossing my arms over my chest. "Isn't it a little early for a rearrangement?" They turned around. Brock looked slightly guilty. Tamsin looked completely unfazed. "Good morning, Dad." Brock lowered his edge of the couch. "We thought you were still asleep." "I'm usually up at 6:30, I replied. "Can I ask what's going on?" "Just making the space more functional." Tamsin smiled her trademark cold smile. "The couch by the window creates better light and frees up space for a desk." I looked at my living room. The armchair I usually read in had been pushed to the corner. The coffee table that held my books and glasses had moved to the wall. The bookcase remained in place only because it could not be moved without disassembly. "Didn't you think to ask me first?" I tried to speak calmly. "After all, this is my house." "We didn't want to bother you with such a small thing." Brock made a conciliatory gesture. "It's a temporary change, Dad. Once we get back to our apartment, everything will be the same. Besides," Tamsin added, "this layout is much more practical. You'll see for yourself how convenient it is." I took a deep breath, trying to contain my irritation. They'd been here less than 24 hours and already they'd started rearranging the space to suit themselves. "Next time, please consult me before you change anything," I said firmly, "especially at 7 in the morning." "Sure, Dad." Brock nodded, but I could see he took my words as a grumble. "I'll make breakfast." Tamsin headed for the kitchen. "I hope you don't mind avocado eggs, Alistair. It's much healthier than your usual buttered toast." Without waiting for an answer, she disappeared into the kitchen. I could hear the cupboards opening and closing. She was obviously looking for something. "Where's your blender, Alistair?" she shouted. "I want to make a smoothie." "I don't have a blender," I replied. "I've never needed one." Tamsin appeared in the doorway with a look of genuine bewilderment on her face. "How can you live without a blender?" She shook her head. "I'll have Brock bring ours over from the apartment. It survived the fire." I didn't answer. Arguing about the necessity of a blender at 7 in the morning seemed absurd. Breakfast passed in tense silence. The avocado scrambled eggs were quite edible, though I would have preferred my usual buttered toast. After breakfast, I was going to get ready for class. The first student was due at 10. Walking into my office, I found my desk littered with boxes. "Brock," I called out. "What is it?" My son appeared in the doorway. "Oh, it's Tamsin's stuff," he explained. "We put them here temporarily until we could figure out where they belonged." "I need my desk to get ready for class," I said. "The first student arrives in 2 hours." "Maybe you could study on the kitchen table," Brock suggested. "Tamsin needs space to work. She's working remotely today." I felt a wave of resentment rising inside, but I held it back. "This is my office, Brock," I said as calmly as I could. "I'll be getting ready here. Move Tamsin's things into your room." Brock sighed like he was dealing with a cranky child. "Okay, Dad, I'll move the boxes." By 9:30, I was ready for class. The room was cleared, but there were a few scratches on the desk from the boxes. I ran my finger over them. The desk was a family heirloom, still from my father. It used to stand in his office at the university. At 10, the doorbell rang. On the doorstep stood Ethan Chen, my first student today. "Good morning, Mr. Royce." He said hello. "Good morning, Ethan. Come on in." I led him into the living room where we usually studied. The boy looked around in surprise. The atmosphere had changed since his last visit. "Is there something new?" he asked. "A temporary change," I replied. "My son and his wife will be staying with me for a while." We sat down at the table and I began to explain the new topic. 15 minutes later, Tamsin entered the living room with a cup of coffee. She took one look at us and smiled. "Don't mind me," she said. "I just need to grab a few things." She walked over to the closet and started looking for something, moving the items around loudly. Ethan got distracted, losing the thread of the explanation. "Tamsin," I said, "we're studying. I'm just leaving now." She picked up a folder and headed for the exit. "Just don't make too much noise, please. I have an important call in an hour." I gritted my teeth but didn't say anything. Ethan and I continued with class, but my concentration was broken. After Ethan left, I had an hour break until the next student. I decided to go through my mail and check my schedule for the next week. Opening the agenda, I was surprised to find that some of the entries had been changed. Chloe Ramirez's class had been moved from morning to evening, and the Parker twins class had been canceled completely. I found Tamsin in the cafeteria. She was sitting at her laptop with headphones around her neck, clearly in between calls. "Tamsin, did you change my schedule?" I asked bluntly. She looked up from the screen. "Oh yes. I called your students' parents and adjusted the schedule a bit. Your morning classes are interfering with my conference calls." She sounded like she was doing me a favor. "Chloe will be able to come after school and the Parker twins will temporarily study with another tutor." I felt the blood rush to my face. "You had no right to do that," I said, trying to control my voice. "These are my students and my schedule." "Alistair," she sighed, "be reasonable. I have to work. Unlike you, I can't just reschedule calls. Corporate schedules are fixed." "You should have discussed this with me first," I insisted. "You didn't even ask my opinion." "I figured you wouldn't mind a little change," she shrugged. "After all, it's just a part-time job for you and my main source of income." "It's not just a part-time job," I objected. "It's my calling, and these kids are counting on me." Tamsin looked at her watch. "I have a call to make," she said. "We can discuss this later. I'm sure you'll realize that these changes are reasonable and necessary." She put on her headphones, signaling that the conversation was over. I stood in the doorway, stunned by her cavalier attitude. In the evening, I tried to talk to Brock. He came home from work around 6, tired and irritated. "Brock, we need to talk about Tamsin," I began. She changed my schedule without authorization. "Dad, this isn't a good time." He took off his tie and threw it on the back of his chair. "I've had a terrible day. The head of the department killed my project again. I understand, but it's important," I insisted. "She'd called my students' parents and—" "She was trying to help," he interrupted me. "Tamsin needs quiet to work. She's trying to adapt to a new situation like the rest of us. But she should have talked to me first." I wasn't going to back down. "This is my home and my students." Brock rubbed his face tiredly. "Look, Dad, we're grateful for the roof over your head. We really are. But we have work to do too. Tamsin can't hold conferences over the noise of math explanations." "I've been explaining math for 40 years and no one's ever complained about the noise," I pointed out. "Times have changed." Brock shook his head. "Everyone works remotely now, video conferencing. You have to adapt." "Adapting doesn't mean ignoring the landlord's opinion," I argued. "The landlord's—" Brock snorted. "You always boil everything down to power and control, just like when I was a kid. My house, my rules." Nothing had changed. I felt old resentments resurfacing. "I've tried to teach you respect for other people's boundaries," I said. "Not very successfully, it seems." "Oh, don't start with the lectures." Brock waved his hand irritably. "I'm 39 years old. I'm not a kid anymore." "Then don't act like one," I retorted. "Grown-ups discuss change, not put others on the spot." Brock opened his mouth to reply, but that's when Tamsin walked in. "What are you two arguing about?" she asked. I can hear you all the way down the street." "Nothing important." Brock gave me a warning look. "Dad's unhappy about some schedule changes. I've already explained to Alistair that these changes are necessary." Tamsin put her hand on Brock's shoulder. "I'm sure he'll understand when he cools down." They looked at me as if I were a gnarly old man who didn't understand modern realities. I felt that further argument was futile. "All right," I said at last. "But in the future, I ask you to consult me before you change anything." "Sure, Dad." Brock nodded with obvious relief that the conflict was over. "We're all learning to live together." The following days brought more changes. One morning, I discovered that most of the family photos were gone from the mantelpiece. In their place were decorative candles and vases I had never seen before. "Where are my pictures?" I asked Tamsin, who was just having breakfast in the kitchen. "In a box in the pantry," she replied, not taking her eyes off her smoothie. I made room for more modern decor items. Those old frames were collecting so much dust. "These are family heirlooms," I said, feeling anger rising inside. "Pictures of my parents, of Eleanor and me, of Brock as a child. They'll keep just fine in the box," Tamsin shrugged, "and the space looks much fresher, don't you think?" I didn't answer and went into the closet. The photographs were carelessly stacked in a cardboard box, some of the frames damaged. I was particularly hurt by the fate of the photo from my wedding to Eleanor. The glass was cracked diagonally. Back in the living room, I silently began to put the photos back in place. "What are you doing?" Tamsin appeared in the doorway with a displeased look on her face. "Putting my things back where they belong," I answered without looking at her. "But I just decorated," she said indignantly. "You're ruining the design." "I'm not interested in design," I continued to arrange the photos. "These are my memories and they'll stay here." Tamsin sighed with a look of martyrdom. "You're so stubborn, Alistair. No wonder Brock is always complaining about your temper." Those words hurt me more than I'd expected. So Brock complained about me to his wife. I wonder what else he told her. "My character was formed long before you came into the family, Tamsin," I said calmly, "and I'm not going to change at 68 for the sake of a questionable design decision." She gave me a cold look. "You know, Alistair, sometimes change is good, especially when a person is stuck in the past. And sometimes people confuse change with unceremonious intrusion into someone else's life," I countered. We stared at each other for a few seconds. Then Tamsin turned and left the room. I heard her on the phone, probably to Brock, complaining about me. By the end of the week, my house was almost unrecognizable. Dozens of Tamsin jars and tubes appeared in the bathroom. In the kitchen, new gadgets I didn't know how to use. In the living room, decorative pillows and plaids turned my old couch into something uncomfortable but stylish. My belongings were gradually pushed to far corners or disappeared altogether. One day I couldn't find my favorite mug. "It was old and cracked," Tamsin explained when I asked. "I threw it away and bought a new set. Look how pretty they are." She pointed to 6 identical white mugs without a single distinguishing feature. My old mug, donated by retired students, was unsightly but native. It said, "To the best math teacher in the universe," and had funny formulas drawn on it. "You had no right to throw it away," I said, feeling my voice shake. "It was a gift." "Don't be dramatic, Alistair," she rolled her eyes. "It's just a mug, and an ugly one at that." I wanted to object, but I realized she wouldn't understand. To her, it was just an old dish. For me, it was a part of my life, a memory now irretrievably lost. That evening, I discovered that my chessboard, usually on the table by the window, was gone. "Brock," I called out to my son, who was watching television in the living room, "where's my chessboard?" "Oh," he looked away from the screen. "Tamsin put it in the closet. Said it was taking up space and collecting dust." "And you let her do that?" I didn't hide my disappointment. "You know that board belonged to your grandfather. He taught you how to play on it." Brock looked a little guilty. "Dad, it's just in the closet." You play online anyway, right? When was the last time you used this board? It's not about how often I use it, I countered. It's about you two acting like this is your house and I'm an extra guest. Brock sighed. We're just trying to make the space more functional. Tamsin is good at this stuff. Tamsin knows how to remodel someone else's house to suit herself, I said, and you're indulging her. Don't start, Dad. Brock held up his hand, stopping me. We're all tired and stressed about the fire. Let's not make this any harder than it has to be. There was more I wanted to say, but I held back. Arguing with Brock was useless. He always defended his wife even when she was wrong. The next morning, I found that Tamsin had retaped the stickers with my students' names and phone numbers that hung on the refrigerator. What happened to my notes? I asked. I organized them more efficiently, she replied. Now they are grouped by day of the week instead of chaotically scattered. They weren't chaotically scattered, I objected. I had a system. If you can call it a system, she muttered. I felt my patience wearing thin. Tamsin, I said as calmly as I could, I appreciate your willingness to help, but I'm asking you not to touch my things without permission, especially things that have to do with my work. You call that work? She raised an eyebrow. A few lessons a week for the kids? Yes, it's my job, I confirmed, and I take it seriously. Maybe you should finally enjoy some well-deserved rest, she suggested with fake concern. At your age, the constant tension is not good for your health. I'll decide what's bad for my health, I said. Now, put my notes back the way they were. Tamsin looked at me with a look of condescending patience, like that of a whimsical child. All right, Alistair, she said at last. If you're comfortable living in chaos, I won't interfere. She removed the post-its and tossed them carelessly on the table. Organize them yourself, however you like. Just don't complain later that you can't find anything. She walked out of the kitchen, leaving me with my scattered notes. I slowly began to put them back in place, trying to get my system back on track. Some post-its were crumpled, others had smeared ink on them. I had to rewrite the information all over again. That evening, when Brock got home from work, I tried to have another conversation with him. Your wife is constantly violating my boundaries, I began. I'm asking you to talk to her. Brock sank tiredly into his chair. Dad, Tamsin just has a different approach to organizing space. She's trying to help. I don't need that kind of help, I objected. I need my things to stay where they are and my decisions to be respected. You've always been like that, Brock sighed, stubborn and unable to accept change, even when it's for the better. Who decides what's for the best? I asked. You, Tamsin, or me in my own home? Brock shook his head. You know what your problem is, Dad? You're stuck in the past, clinging to old things, old habits. The world moves on and you stay where you are. Respect for other people's space and things is not an outdated concept, I parried. It's basic courtesy. You just don't want to admit that Tamsin is really improving your house, Brock said. It looks much more modern and comfortable now. More comfortable for who? I didn't give up. For you two, maybe, but not for me. Brock rubbed his temples, clearly losing patience. Look, Dad, we appreciate you putting a roof over our heads. We really do. But can't you cut us some slack? We're all trying to adjust to a new situation. Adjusting doesn't mean letting my life be completely remade, I replied. I've put up with a lot this week, but my patience isn't infinite. Brock stood up, clearly annoyed. Your stubbornness is unbearable, he said. No wonder Mom always said you were impossible to argue with. That was a low blow. Eleanor never said that, at least not in this context. She appreciated my integrity, though she sometimes teased me about it. Leave your mother out of this conversation, I said quietly. She would never approve of the way you two are behaving in my house. You don't know what she would approve of, Brock raised his voice. She left 5 years ago, Dad. Stop using her memory as a shield against any change. I felt something shatter inside. My own son was accusing me of manipulating his mother's memory. This was too much. "Get out," I said, pointing to the door. "I need to be alone." Brock looked at me with a mixture of anger and perhaps regret. "Whatever you say." He headed for the exit but stopped in the doorway. "You know, sometimes I think you're just afraid to admit that our ideas are better than yours, that the world has changed and you haven't." He walked away, leaving me alone with my bitter thoughts. I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes. The house no longer felt like my sanctuary. It had become a battlefield, where every little thing became a cause for conflict. At that moment, I realized that Brock and Tamsin weren't just staying with me temporarily. They were methodically forcing me out of my own space, remodeling it to suit themselves. And worst of all, they thought it was normal and right. My arguments were perceived as senile stubbornness, unwillingness to accept change. But it wasn't about change per se. It was about respect and boundaries, which they constantly violated. It had been 2 weeks since Brock and Tamsin had moved into my house. In that time, they have completely remodeled my household, ignoring all of my objections and requests. It's Friday night and I've decided to make a special dinner, beef burgundy, Eleanor's specialty. Sort of like an olive branch, a naive attempt at a relationship. In the morning, I went to the market for fresh ingredients. Spent almost 2 hours picking out the best cuts of meat, vegetables, and a bottle of good red wine. On the way back, I stopped at the bakery for a fresh baguette, a little ritual that Eleanor and I always observed. When I got home, I found Tamsin at the kitchen table with her laptop. "Decided to have a feast?" she asked with a slight sneer, looking at my packages. "Thought we could all use a good dinner," I replied, laying out the groceries. "I'm going to make beef bourguignon." "Sounds caloric," Tamsin grumbled. "Brock and I try to limit red meat. Bad for your cholesterol." "One time won't hurt," I remarked, starting to slice the onions. Besides, I'd already bought all the ingredients. I started cooking, trying to ignore her presence. The smell began to waft through the kitchen, reminding me of the times when this house was warm and cozy. "It's a pretty strong odor," Tamsin said, wrinkling her nose. "Could you turn on the extractor fan?" I silently turned on the hood, though Eleanor and I had enjoyed the aromas of cooking food before. When all the ingredients were in the pot, I set a slow fire and left the meat to stew for several hours. Around 5 o'clock in the evening, Brock returned. He looked tired, but in better spirits than usual. "What smells so good?" he asked, entering the kitchen. "Beef burgundy," I answered. "Your mother's recipe." His face softened for a moment. "I haven't had it in a long time," he said quietly. "My mom used to make it for my birthday a lot." "I know," I nodded. "That's why I thought I'd make it. It'll be ready by 7. Brock nodded and headed for the bedroom. I could hear him talking to Tamsin, but I couldn't make out the words. Soon they both came out. Tamsin was holding the phone. "Alistair," she began, "that's very nice of you, but Brock and I have decided to order a delivery." "Delivery?" I looked at them in surprise. "But I'm almost done with the arrangements." "You see," she smiled her trademark cold smile, "we're on a special diet right now. A low-carbohydrate diet with limited animal fats. Your dish, with all due respect, does not fit our dietary regimen." I looked at Brock, expecting him to intervene, but he avoided my gaze. "You just said you wanted to try it," I reminded him. He hesitated. "Tamsin's right. We need to watch our diet. The doctor recommended it." "It's a preventative measure," Tamsin intervened. "We're taking care of our future. Unlike some people," she glanced pointedly at the pot of beef. "All right," I said finally. "Order whatever you want. I'll eat my dinner myself." By 7 o'clock we were all at the table. I made myself a side of beef and mashed potatoes. Brock and Tamsin set out their containers of food from the delivery, some colorful mix of quinoa, avocado, and other fancy ingredients. Would you like a taste, Alistair? Tamsin held out her container to me. It's turmeric quinoa bowls with tofu and microgreens. Cleanses the body of toxins. No thanks, I cut off a piece of meat. I prefer food, not bowls. We ate in awkward silence. I noticed Brock glancing at my plate a few times, clearly struggling with temptation. Deciding to change the subject, I pulled envelopes from my pocket. The utility bills are here, I said. They've gone up considerably since you arrived. It's only natural, Brock shrugged. There's 3 of us instead of 1. It's not just the number of people, I countered. The electric bill has almost tripled. All those gadgets you're constantly charging, the computers that run 24 hours a day. It's necessary for our work, Tamsin cut in. We can't shut down equipment just because you want a few extra dollars. It's not about dollars, I tried to say calmly. It's about respect. You live in my house. You use my resources, but you don't think you should even discuss it. We can make up the difference in bills, Brock suggested. It's not a problem. Again, it's not about money, I repeated. It's about attitude. You act like this is your home. What's wrong with that? Tamsin asked. We're trying to make it more comfortable for everyone. Everyone? I raised an eyebrow. Or just the 2 of you. You're obviously not interested in my opinion. Because your opinion is outdated, Tamsin said, not hiding her irritation. You cling to the past, to old things and habits. The world has moved on, Alistair. This house is my world, I said firmly, and here I decide what's out of date and what isn't. That's the problem, Brock sighed. You can't accept that sometimes other people know better, that their ideas can be better than yours. In my own house, I was starting to lose my patience. The house I bought for $970,000, the house I'd lived in most of my life. It's time to face it, Dad. Brock looked me straight in the eye, his voice cold, that you're no longer the boss of this house. You can't even look after your own health, let alone keep order. I froze, not believing my ears. My own son had just declared that I was not the master of my house. What did you say? My voice was quiet but firm. Listen, Brock leaned forward. Tamsin and I are worried about you. You live alone. You don't eat right. Your house is slowly falling into disrepair. It's not safe for a man of your age. We've given it a lot of thought, Tamsin said, and we found a great place with care. The Sunny Hills residence. They have great reviews, 24-hour nursing staff, lots of activities for seniors. What? I couldn't believe what was happening. You're looking for a nursing home for me? It's not a nursing home, Tamsin corrected. It's an assisted living residence for the elderly. That's different. And when were you going to tell me about these plans? I asked, feeling the blood pounding in my temples. We're doing that right now, Brock replied. We've signed up for a tour next Wednesday. You'll see how nice it is there. What's going to happen to my house? I already knew the answer, but I wanted to hear it from them. They looked at each other. Well, the logical thing to do would be to sell it, Brock said cautiously. The residence isn't cheap, and the money from the sale would cover your living there for years to come. And the rest would go to you, I stated the obvious. Dad, this isn't about money. Brock tried to sound sincere. It's about your safety and well-being. And the fact that this neighborhood is becoming more and more prestigious, Tamsin added. Real estate prices are going up every month. It wouldn't be wise to pass up an opportunity like this. I got up from the table. If you'll excuse me, I need to think. I walked out of the kitchen, feeling my hands shaking with restrained anger and shock. Behind me, I could hear Tamsin whispering to Brock, "See? He's incapable of intelligent dialogue. That proves our point." In my bedroom, I closed the door and sat on the bed. Everything fell into place. They weren't just staying with me temporarily. They were planning to take my house away. I wasn't a father figure to them, but an obstacle to valuable real estate. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the contacts. stopped at the name Hugh Donnelly. We'd met years ago when I'd given private lessons to his son. Hugh was a policeman, now retired. We became good friends over the years. Alistair? Hugh sounded surprised. I haven't heard from you in a while. Is everything all right? Not really, I answered quietly. I need your help, Hugh. Professional. I briefly explained the situation, how Brock and Tamsin had moved in, how they'd gradually remodeled the house for themselves, and finally their plans to put me in a nursing home and sell my property. They said I'm no longer the owner in this house, I finished, and they threatened to declare me incompetent if I didn't agree. That's a twist, Hugh whistled. Look, I have a friend in the sheriff's department. Technically, your son and his wife are intruders who refuse to leave. That's grounds for eviction. Are you sure about that? I hesitated. It's my son, after all. Who plans to put you in a nursing home against your will and take your house? Hugh reminded me. Sometimes you have to protect yourself, even from family. Okay, what do you want me to do? Get the deed to the house ready. I'll be there in an hour with a friend of mine. He'll explain the procedure and help with the official eviction notice. After the conversation, I took all the house documents out of the safe, the property certificate, insurance, tax receipts. Then I organized the utility bills into a folder, proof of the spike in expenses after their arrival. Exactly an hour later, the doorbell rang. Brock opened it and saw Hugh in the company of a man in a sheriff's uniform. Good evening, said Hugh. We're here to see Alistair Royce. This is my father, Brock looked puzzled. And who are you? Hugh Donnelly, my friend introduced himself. And this is Officer Michael Peterson. We're here on official business. I went to the door and invited them in. Tamsin came out of the kitchen when she heard unfamiliar voices. What's wrong? She asked, looking around at the guests. Sit down, please, Officer Peterson suggested. I have an official notice for both of you. Brock and Tamsin exchanged concerned glances, but sat down on the couch. Mr. Brock Royce and Mrs. Tamsin Royce, the officer began, pulling out a document. I hereby give you notice that you must leave this residence within 24 hours. This demand comes from the rightful owner of this property, Mr. Alistair Royce. What? Brock jumped up from the couch. Dad, what are you doing? What I should have done all along, I answered calmly, protecting my home and my independence. You're kicking us out? Tamsin looked shocked. Your son and daughter-in-law? You said yourself that I am no longer the master of this house, I reminded her. Well, I still am, and I decide who lives here. That's illegal, Brock exclaimed. We had a fire. We have nowhere to go. According to state law, continued Officer Peterson, you are guests, not tenants, because you have not signed a lease or paid rent. The owner has the right to ask you to leave the premises at any time. This is crazy, Tamsin turned to me. You can't do this to us. I can, I replied firmly. Just like you could plan to send me to a nursing home against my will. We were taking care of you. Brock looked both furious and confused at the same time. That was care. No, I shook my head. It was an attempt to take over my house, but it failed. You have 24 hours to pack up and leave, Officer Peterson repeated. If you do not leave the premises voluntarily, further action will be taken. We'll sue you, Brock threatened, for emotional trauma. Go ahead, I was calm. I have all the documents proving my ownership, and witnesses to how you plan to declare me incapacitated. Brock and Tamsin looked shocked. They clearly hadn't expected this turn of events. Dang, you have 24 hours, Officer Peterson repeated, handing them a copy of the notice. I recommend you start packing. Come on, Brock, Tamsin pulled her husband by the arm. We need to call our lawyer. They retreated to the bedroom, slamming the door behind them. I could hear them talking loudly, but I couldn't make out the words. Thank you both, I said to Hugh and Officer Peterson. "I don't know what I would have done without your help." "You're welcome, Mr. Royce," the officer nodded. "If there's any problem with their eviction, call right away." "Be careful, Alistair," Hugh warned. "They might try something. Are you sure you want to be alone with them?" "I'll manage," I assured him. It wouldn't be any worse than it had been these last 2 weeks. After Hugh and the officer left, I went back into the kitchen and sat down at the table. My untouched dinner had gotten cold, but I ate a few bites anyway. After a while, Brock and Tamsin came out of the bedroom. They looked furious but composed. "Our lawyer said you do have the legal right to evict us," Brock said coldly. "But that's not the end of it, Dad. We're still going to initiate a capacity test on you." "You can try," I shrugged. "But I have friends, students, neighbors who will confirm that I'm sane." "We'll leave in the morning," Tamsin said. "But mark my words, Alistair, you will regret this decision when you fall and there is no one to call an ambulance." "I'd rather take my chances," I said. "And by the way, about your fire, was there really one? Or was it just a ploy to settle here?" They exchanged quick glances, and I realized I'd hit the mark. "The renovations to our apartment are finished," Brock said after a pause. "We can go back there." "How convenient," I said. "You'll regret it," Tamsin repeated. "Growing old alone is a terrible thing." I didn't answer. They retreated to the bedroom again, and I heard them start to pack. Sitting at the table with my dinner cooling, I felt a strange mixture of relief and bitterness. I had just kicked my own son out of the house. But there was no choice. They had clearly shown their true intentions. It was starting to rain outside the window. The drops pounded on the roof, creating a soothing rhythm. Tomorrow my house would belong to me alone again. It was both a victory and a defeat, but I knew I had done the right thing. The morning after Brock and Tamsin were evicted was strangely quiet. I woke up feeling like the house belonged to just me again. No one rearranged my things, no one commented on my breakfast, no one criticized my habits. But along with the calm came a feeling of emptiness, as if the house had become more than it needed to be for one person. They left early, while I was still asleep. There was a note on the kitchen table. The keys were left in the mailbox. "Our lawyer will contact you. Brock and Tamsin." No apology, no attempt at reconciliation, just a cold notice and a veiled threat. I walked around the house, assessing the extent of the changes they'd managed to make in 2 weeks. Some things had been irretrievably lost. My favorite mug, a few family photos, some little things they deemed unimportant and thrown away. Others were simply moved or hidden. I spent the day restoring my usual order, returning the house to its former look and atmosphere. Towards evening, Hugh called. "How are you, Alistair?" He sounded genuinely worried. "I'm fine," I answered, though it wasn't quite true. "They left early in the morning. All they left was a note." "I'm not surprised," Hugh chuckled. "Look, I found out something about their fire, or rather, the absence of a fire." "What do you mean?" I tensed up. "I got in touch with a friend from the fire department. There was indeed a small fire in their apartment due to faulty wiring, but it was almost 2 months ago, and the damage was minimal, mostly soot on the kitchen walls. The insurance company fully covered the repairs, which had already been completed a month ago. I felt a wave of anger rising inside. "They lied to me," I said quietly. "They used this minor incident as an excuse to move in with me." "I guess so," Hugh agreed. "Apparently, they'd planned it in advance. Apparently, they thought it would be easier to get your house if they were around to prove you were incapacitated." I always knew Tamsin was self-serving. I shook my head. But I didn't think Brock would support such a scheme against his own father. "People change, Alistair," Hugh sighed, "and not always for the better, especially under the influence." I sat in my chair for a long time after Hugh's talk, looking at Eleanor's picture. What would she say about our son now? About the boy we had raised with love and hope, who had turned into a man willing to deceive and betray for gain. I spent the next few days getting my life back to normal. I resumed my schedule with my students, returned to my chess tournaments, and started cooking myself simple but nutritious meals again, just as I had done before Brock and Tamsin arrived. Soon, however, I noticed a strange change in the attitudes of those around me. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who always stopped to chat, now only nodded dryly when she met me. Mr. Chen, Ethan's father, began to bring his son to class and leave immediately, avoiding conversation. Even at the local supermarket, the cashier, who had known me for years, suddenly became taciturn and aloof. The first direct blow came a week after the eviction. The Parker twins' parents called to let me know they no longer needed my services. "We found another tutor," Mrs. Parker said, not looking me in the eye when I met her at the supermarket. "He's younger. He uses modern methods." "Are you dissatisfied with my teaching?" I asked her bluntly. The boys were making good progress. "It's not that," she fidgeted with the strap of her bag. "It's just, we've heard that you're having some personal problems, of a personal nature." "What kind of problems?" I was beginning to see where she was going with this. "Well, they say that she hesitated, "that you have trouble remembering things, and judgment. Your son mentioned that you don't always make good judgment calls, so that's it." Brock and Tamsin didn't just leave, they started spreading rumors about me. They were preparing the ground for my incapacitation by creating the image of a senile old man out of his mind. "Mrs. Parker," I said, trying to speak calmly, "I've taught high school math for 43 years. I have an impeccable reputation. I'm of sound mind and good judgment, and my son and I do have a disagreement, but it has to do with him trying to take my house." She looked embarrassed but unconvinced. "Of course, Mr. Royce. We thought we'd try something new for the boys. You understand." I understood. I understood that now I had to contend not only with Brock and Tamsin, but with the reputation they were giving me. That evening, I got a call from Chloe Ramirez. She was crying. "Mr. Royce, my mom says I can't go to your classes anymore," she sobbed. "She said you're a bad person because you kicked your son out of the house. But I don't believe it. You are the best teacher." I was touched by her loyalty but realized I couldn't drag my child into this situation. "Chloe, thank you for your trust," I said softly. "But you need to listen to your mom. I'm sure she means well. Perhaps, in time, she will change her mind." "But that's not fair," objected the girl. "I have learned so much from you. I want to go on." "Sometimes life is unfair," I answered. "But you are a smart girl, Chloe. You can learn without me. And if your mom ever changes her mind, my door is always open to you." After that conversation, I felt devastated. Kids were an important part of my life after retirement. They gave me purpose, kept my mind sharp. And now Brock and Tamsin were trying to take that away from me, too. Fortunately, not everyone succumbed to their manipulations. Ethan Chen kept coming to class, though his father remained aloof. Marcus Tate, my most difficult student, also stayed. His parents, it seemed, were too busy with their own affairs to delve into the local gossip. "You know, Mr. Royce," Marcus said to me one day, "my father says you've gone out of your mind and thrown your son out on the street. But I told him that a man who can explain integral calculus in a way that even I can understand is definitely not out of his mind." I smiled, touched by his awkward but sincere encouragement. "Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate your opinion. Did you really throw your son out on the street?" he asked with teenage directness. "I asked him and his wife to leave my house after they told me I was no longer the boss of it and planned to send me to a nursing home against my will," I answered honestly. Marcus whistled. "That's quite a twist. So you're not a crazy old man, but a tough old man." I laughed for the first time in a long time. "I hope so, Marcus. Now back to differential equations." Despite the support of a few students, I was feeling increasingly isolated. Neighbors with whom I had maintained good neighborly relations for years now shunned me. At the local cafe where I sometimes stopped for coffee, I was looked at with suspicion. I could hear whispers behind me. "That's the old man who kicked his own son out of the house. They say he's not right in the head. Too bad for him, all alone, no one to take care of him." Hugh offered me a public denial of the rumors, but I refused. I hated the idea of bringing family problems into the public eye, of justifying myself to people who so easily believed the worst about me without bothering to find out my side of the story. "It will only add fuel to the fire," I said to Hugh. "They'll see my attempts to defend myself as confirmation of their suspicions. The truth will eventually come out." "Perhaps," Hugh agreed, but I could see that he did not believe it. "But in the meantime, you will suffer injustice." "I'll get over it," I said. It was not the first time I had been confronted with people's stupidity and prejudice. However, even my resilience was being tested. It was especially hard on weekends, when there were no classes to distract myself. I spent long hours alone, sometimes talking to Eleanor's picture, sometimes playing online chess with strangers around the world, sometimes just sitting in the backyard looking at the half-abandoned garden. On one of those days, I decided to tackle the garden. Eleanor loved roses, and after her death I had neglected the care of them. Now, looking at the overgrown bushes, I felt guilty. It was a part of her legacy that I had failed to preserve. I found gardening tools in the garage and spent the day trimming dead branches, weeding and tying up drooping stems. The work was hard for my age, but strangely satisfying. By evening my hands were scratched from the thorns and my back was aching, but the garden looked much better. Not as good as it had been under Eleanor, but it was a start. The next day I continued, and another day after that. Gradually the garden began to come to life. Some rose bushes I thought were dead showed new shoots. The apple tree, pruned and free of parasites, looked healthier. I even started planting a small vegetable garden for the spring, something simple that I could maintain on my own. Working in the garden became therapy for me. I would go out there every day, no matter the weather, and find something to improve. It gave me purpose, kept my hands busy, and distracted me from thoughts of my son's betrayal and my neighbor's judgment. One day, as I was working near the fence, the neighbor on the other side, Mrs. Hendricks, stopped to observe. "The garden is coming alive," she remarked after some silence. "I'm trying," I replied without interrupting my work. My wife wouldn't approve of the way I'd been tending it the last few years. "Eleanor was a master with roses," Mrs. Hendricks nodded. "She always surprised us all with her flowers." We were silent for a moment. Then she said suddenly, "I don't believe the rumors, Mr. Royce. I've known you for 30 years. You've always been a sensible man, and a good father as far as I could tell." I straightened up, feeling my back tense from the long bend. "Thank you, Mrs. Hendricks. That, means a lot to me." She nodded and continued on her way. It was a small moment of encouragement, but it gave me strength. Over the next few days, I noticed a slight change. Mrs. Patterson stopped to chat again, though not as friendly as before. The cashier at the supermarket smiled at me. Small signs that not everyone believed the rumors, or at least was beginning to doubt them. But Brock and Tamsin weren't giving up. 3 weeks after the eviction, I found an officially stamped envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a notice to initiate the process of verifying my legal capacity. Brock filed an application claiming that I was showing signs of dementia, paranoia, and inability to care for myself. The evidence cited was my unfounded accusations against them, my inadequate response to their attempts to help, and the neglected state of my home and garden. I stared at the paper for a long time, feeling a wave of anger and bitterness rising inside. My own flesh and blood son was trying to legally declare me incapacitated in order to gain control of my property. How low could he have fallen? I immediately called Hugh. "I got the notice. I said as soon as he answered. Brock had applied after all. I thought he would. Hugh sighed. You need a good lawyer, Alistair. This is a serious case. I don't have money for expensive lawyers, I admitted. My pension is modest and I've put my savings into a house. I know a man, Hugh said after a pause. My niece, Diane. She specializes in incapacity cases. Used to work for a large firm, but left to help elderly people who are being tried by their relatives for disenfranchisement. She charges a reasonable fee and sometimes works pro bono if she finds a case particularly egregious. You think she'll find my case egregious? I asked with a bitter chuckle. I'm sure she will, Hugh replied firmly. I'll tell her the situation. If she agrees, I'll bring her to you tomorrow. The next day, Hugh arrived with Diana Donnelly, a young woman with a determined look and a straight posture. She listened carefully to my story, asked some precise questions, and went through the documents I had gathered, the house ownership certificate, my bank statements, my student records, even the medical certificates from my last checkup showing that I was in good physical and mental condition for my age. Mr. Royce, she said as she finished reviewing the documents, your case is a classic example of what we call predatory guardianship. Relatives attempt to gain control of an elderly person's assets by declaring them incapacitated, often for no real reason. Unfortunately, these cases are not uncommon. It's disgusting, Hugh said. I agree, Diana nodded. But in Mr. Royce's case, we have a good chance of winning. He's clearly capable, has an active social life, continues to work, takes care of himself and his home. Plus, we have evidence of self-interest on the part of his son and daughter-in-law. So you'll take my case? I asked. Absolutely, she replied firmly. And don't worry about the fee. We'll work something out. After Diana and Hugh left, I felt strangely relieved. Yes, I had a fight ahead of me, perhaps the hardest fight of my life. But now I had support and a plan of action. I was no longer alone against Brock, Tamsin, and their lawyers. In the evening, sitting in the garden with a cup of tea, I watched the sun set. The rose bushes I'd worked so hard to revive cast long shadows. The apple tree rustled its leaves quietly in the evening wind. The house behind me, my home, stood strong and secure as it had all the years before. I won't give up, Eleanor, I whispered, looking up at the sunset. I will fight for our home, for our memory, for my dignity. The next morning, checking the mail, I found another official envelope. It contained a notice setting a date for my competency hearing. In 3 weeks, I would have to prove in court that I didn't need guardianship and was capable of making my own decisions. The thought of it was humiliating, but I was willing to go through the ordeal to maintain my independence. The day of the hearing came on a cold October morning. I put on my best suit, the one I had been teaching in for the last few years before I retired. It sat a little looser on me now, but it still looked dignified. Eleanor always said the color blue gave me authority. Diane picked me up in her modest silver Toyota. In the 3 weeks leading up to the hearing, she had become not just a lawyer, but a friend. A young woman with a sharp mind and a strong sense of justice, she invested far more time and energy into my case than I could have expected. "Nervous, Mr. Royce?" she asked as we drove toward the courthouse. "Strangely enough, no," I answered honestly. "I've been telling the truth all my life. I see no reason to start lying now." She smiled. "That's exactly why we're going to win. Judge Harris, who will be conducting the hearing, is famous for her good sense of people. She has dismissed such claims many times when she sees that the case is more about money than real concern." At the courthouse, Hugh was already waiting for us. He shook my hand and nodded encouragingly. We walked into the small room where these hearings were held. Inside, Brock and Tamsin were already sitting there, both in strict business suits, with perfect hair and serious expressions on their faces. Next to them was their lawyer, a tall man in an expensive suit with a leather briefcase. Brock tensed when he saw me, and Tamsin pressed her lips together. I sat back in my seat, trying not to look in their direction. Then I noticed that there were other people in the audience. Ethan Chen and his father, Marcus Tate and his mother, Mrs. Hendricks, even Chloe Ramirez and her parents. They came to support me? I was touched to the core. "Diana, you invited them?" I whispered. "No," she shook her head. "They heard about the hearing and decided to come. It's good that they're here. Their testimony will carry weight." Soon, Judge Harris appeared, a woman in her 60s with a shrewd eye and gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She nodded to all present and opened the hearing. "We are here to consider Brock Royce's petition to declare his father, Alistair Royce, incapacitated," she began. "Mr. Brock Royce claims that his father is showing signs of dementia, paranoia, and inability to care for himself, and seeks appointment of himself as legal guardian with the right to administer his father's estate." We first hear the petitioner's arguments. Brock's attorney stood up and began methodically laying out the evidence of my incapacity. He described how I unreasonably kicked my son and daughter-in-law out of my home, how I refused to accept their help, how I paranoidly accused them of trying to take my home away. He cited the neglected state of the house and garden, my unhealthy diet, and social isolation as evidence of my inability to care for myself. My client and his wife are concerned that Mr. Alistair Royce is living alone in a large house without proper care and supervision, the lawyer concluded. They propose to sell the house and use the funds to provide him with comfortable accommodation in a specialized facility with 24-hour medical supervision. Judge Harris listened intently, making notes from time to time. Then she turned to Diane. "Now, let's hear from the defense." Diane stood up, straightened to her small stature, and began to speak, clearly, confidently, without unnecessary emotion. "Your Honor, my client, Alistair Royce, has worked as a math teacher for 43 years, educating several generations of students. After retirement, he continues to lead an active intellectual life, giving private lessons, participating in online chess tournaments, reading and maintaining his home and garden. The allegations of his incapacity are not only unfounded but insulting." She methodically rebutted each of Brock's attorney's arguments with documents, my medical certificates, bank statements showing regular bill payments, photos of the house and garden in their current, well-maintained condition. "As for the unwarranted eviction of my son and daughter-in-law," Diane continued, "we have testimony that they planned to send Mr. Royce to a nursing home against his will and sell his house, telling him to his face that he was no longer the owner in this house. Moreover," she pulled out a new document, "we have proof that the fire in their apartment, which they used as an excuse to move in with Mr. Royce, was a minor incident, the damage from which was fully covered by insurance until a month ago. They had deliberately deceived Mr. Royce into moving into his home." A low whisper swept through the hall. Judge Harris raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Donnelly. Do you have evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor." Diane handed over the documents. "A fire inspection report and a letter from the insurance company confirming payment and completion of repairs." Brock and Tamsin looked at each other with obvious concern. Their lawyer looked annoyed. They didn't seem to have filled him in on all the details of the situation. "Now, I would like to invite witnesses who can confirm Mr. Royce's capacity," Diana continued. The first to speak was Ethan Chen. The 15-year-old was nervous but spoke clearly. "Mr. Royce is the best teacher I've ever met. He explains difficult concepts in a way that even I understand, and he's very organized, always remembers what we went over in the last class, what the assignments were. He even spotted an error in the textbook that none of the other school teachers saw." Mrs. Hendricks was next. "I've known Alistair Royce for 30 years. We're neighbors. He's always been a model of reliability and common sense. For the last month, I've been watching him revitalize his garden. Hard work for a man of his age, but he's doing a fine job. A person with dementia would not have been able to plan and carry out such work so methodically. Chloe Ramirez then spoke. The 12-year-old girl stepped forward with determination. Mr. Royce taught me to love math. Before him, I was afraid of math. He is always patient, attentive, and remembers all my questions, even the ones I asked a few lessons ago. And he also teaches us not to be afraid to ask questions, even if they seem silly. He says there are no stupid questions, only hesitant students. I think he is very wise. To my surprise, even Chloe's mother, who had forbidden her daughter to attend my lessons, spoke in my support. I gave in to the rumors and wrongly forbade my daughter to study with Mr. Royce. I see now that I was wrong. He is an excellent teacher and, as far as I can tell, a perfectly sensible man. Marcus Tate was the last to speak. I don't like math, he began bluntly, and I'm not a particularly good student. But Mr. Royce never gives up. He finds new ways to explain when I don't understand. He remembers all my mistakes and helps me correct them, and he taught me chess, a complex game that requires strategic thinking. If he were incapacitated, as his son claims, he wouldn't be able to beat me every time. Laughter erupted in the audience. Judge Harris smiled too. After the witnesses, it was my turn to speak. I stood up and looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I have lived a long life dedicated to education. I taught children to think logically, to analyze, to not be afraid to ask questions. I've always believed in the power of reason, and I still do. Yes, I am old. Yes, sometimes it is difficult for me to do physical work that used to be easy. But my mind is clear, my memory works perfectly, and I'm able to make informed decisions about my life and possessions. I looked at Brock, who was avoiding my gaze. My son and his wife did tell me that I am no longer the master of my house. They were actually planning to send me to a senior residence and sell my house. The house I bought with my life savings. The house where I lived with my wife, where I raised my son. I cannot and will not allow them to dispose of my life in this manner. Judge Harris looked at me carefully, and I felt that she was evaluating not only my words, but my manner of speaking, my clarity of thought. Thank you, Mr. Royce, she said at last. I'd like to ask you a few questions, if you don't mind. She asked me about everyday things, how I organize my day, how I budget, how I take care of the house. Then she moved on to more complex topics, how I make healthcare decisions, how I plan for the future. I answered clearly and thoroughly, demonstrating my competence on these issues. Finally, Judge Harris asked the last question. Mr. Royce, if you really needed help with your daily life because of declining health, what would you do? I thought for a moment. I would seek help from professionals, doctors, social workers. I would consider various options from a visiting assistant to specialized institutions if the situation became critical. But I would make this decision myself, based on objective information and advice from specialists, not under pressure from relatives who have already demonstrated that they are more interested in my property than in my well-being. The judge nodded and turned to Brock. Mr. Brock Royce, do you have anything to add? Brock looked uncertain. I just want my father to be safe and receive proper care. He's getting older and one day he's going to need help. And how do you explain the fire and insurance information? The judge asked bluntly. Did you really lie to your father about the condition of your apartment? Brock hesitated. We didn't lie. We just didn't tell the whole truth. We were really worried about him and it seemed like a good way to check up on him. Check? The judge interjected. Or create a situation that might confirm your theory about his incapacity. Brock didn't answer. Tamsin beside him tensed, her face pale. Judge Harris looked at the documents for a moment, then looked up. Based on the evidence and testimony presented, I am denying Alistair Royce's application for a declaration of incompetency. Mr. Royce demonstrates clarity of mind, the ability to make informed decisions and take care of himself. Moreover, there is good reason to believe that this application was made with self-serving motives rather than out of genuine concern for Mr. Royce's welfare. She banged her gavel. Case closed. The room erupted in applause from my students and their parents. Diana shook my hand firmly, her eyes shining with genuine joy. Hugh clapped me on the shoulder. I didn't doubt it for a second, Alistair. Brock and Tamsin quickly left the room without a glance in my direction. I followed them with a mixed feeling of relief and bitterness. I had won the case, but I had lost my son. After the hearing, Diane, Hugh, and I went to a small cafe to celebrate the victory. Ethan and his father, Chloe and her parents, and Marcus joined us. To justice, Hugh raised a toast. And to math, Chloe added with a smile. It was a good day. One of those rare days when truth and justice triumphed over lies and self-interest. A week after the hearing, Hugh stopped by with news. Do you know what your Brock and Tamsin are doing? They bought a house in Templeton, a new one in that fancy neighborhood by the lake. In Templeton? I was surprised. That's an expensive neighborhood. Where'd they get all that money? Remember the fire insurance? Hugh raised an eyebrow. Apparently, they got a lot more than they needed for repairs. Plus, my source says they took out a decent loan. Apparently, they really wanted to move there. I shook my head. I always knew Tamsin was ambitious. She was always comparing herself to her more successful friends. Anyway, they're far away now, Hugh remarked. That's good for you. I wasn't sure if it was good. Despite everything that had happened, Brock was still my son. But I realized that our relationship would never be the same. In the following weeks, I noticed that the locals were starting to treat me normally again. Rumors of a crazy old man subsided after the court ruling. Parents of students who had refused my services gradually returned. Mrs. Parker called and asked if I would take her twins again. We're very sorry, Mr. Royce, she said sincerely. We succumbed to the rumors and jumped to conclusions. I agreed to resume classes without holding a grudge. At my age, you realize that people often act out of fear and ignorance rather than malice. One day, as I walked past the window of a local college, I saw an ad for programming courses for beginners. Age doesn't matter, the poster read. Learn to build your own websites and apps. I stopped, intrigued. All my life I'd been teaching others, but it had been a long time since I'd learned anything new myself. Could this be a chance? The next day I showed up at the college and signed up for the course. The administrator, a young woman with brightly colored hair, looked at me in surprise. Are you sure you want to learn programming? It's quite difficult. Young lady, I replied with a smile, I spent 43 years explaining integral calculus to children. I think I can handle a few lines of code. She laughed and handed me the training materials. The courses turned out to be exactly what I needed, a new challenge, new people, new knowledge. I was several decades older than the other students, but that didn't matter. We were all there to learn. Gradually, I began to form an idea. What if I combined my math teaching experience with my new programming skills? Create an educational website with interactive challenges, explanations, video lessons. Make math accessible and interesting for children around the world. I started working on this project in my spare time. At first it was difficult. New terms, new concepts, constant errors in the code. But every day it got easier. My brain, used to logical problems, quickly adapted to programming. I hadn't heard from Brock except for official letters from his attorney regarding legal fees and other formalities. I responded through Diane, who continued to represent my interests. Our relationship became dry, formal, as between strangers, not father and son. It hurt, but I accepted that reality. One warm spring day, almost 6 months after the trial, I was sitting on the veranda of my house with my laptop, working on my website. The roses in the garden I had worked so hard to revive were beginning to bloom. The apple tree was covered with delicate white flowers. Life went on, despite the losses and disappointments. I was creating a section on geometry for middle schoolers, trying to explain the concept of the similarity of triangles in a way that would be understandable and interesting to 12-year-olds. An interactive model gradually appeared on the screen that students could modify as they watched the proportions change. I was so engrossed in my work that I didn't immediately notice the car pulling up in front of my house. It wasn't until the door slammed that I looked up and saw Brock standing at the gate. He was alone, without Tamsin, and he looked unsure. We stared at each other in silence for a few seconds. Then he stepped forward. "Hi, Dad. Can I come in?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, remembering everything he'd done. The other part, the fatherly part, still saw him as the little boy I'd taught to ride his bike, the one I'd read books to at bedtime. "Come in," I said finally, closing my laptop. "To what do I owe the visit?" He came up to the veranda but didn't sit down, shuffling from foot to foot. I wanted to apologize for everything Tamsin and I did. It was wrong." I looked at him carefully, trying to see if he was sincere. "What's changed, Brock? Why now?" He took a deep breath. "Tamsin and I are getting a divorce. She met someone else, richer, more successful." He grinned bitterly. "Ironic, isn't it? She used me the same way we tried to use you." I felt no satisfaction at his confession, only sadness for him, for myself, for what we'd all become. "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "Don't be," he shook his head. "I deserved it, and I've learned a lot these past few months, about myself, about life, about what's really important." He looked at my laptop. "What are you doing?" "I'm building a math education website," I replied. "I'm learning to program." "Programming?" He looked surprised. "At your age? What's the big deal?" I shrugged. "The brain needs exercise just like the body, and I've always loved learning new things." Brock nodded, and for a moment I saw something like respect in his eyes. "Can I come over sometimes?" he asked uncertainly. "Just talk, maybe help with the garden." I looked at my son, a grown man with lines of fatigue on his face, gray on his temples, eyes that read remorse and hope. I didn't know if I could ever fully trust him again. I didn't know if we could rebuild what had been destroyed, but I knew I wanted to try. "We can," I answered. "Just without Tamsin." "Of course," he nodded. "Thank you, Dad." After he left, I sat on the veranda for a long time looking at my garden. Loss and regeneration, the eternal cycle of life. The rose bushes that had seemed hopelessly dead were now full of buds. Perhaps our relationship with Brock would bloom again someday too. Not the same as before, but maybe more sincere. I opened my laptop and went back to work on the website. The bitterness of losing my family ties was still palpable, but alongside it came another feeling. Pride that I had stood my ground, maintained control of my life and my dignity, and found the strength to move on, to learn new things, to create something useful. After all, that's what I've been teaching my students all these years, to never give up, to always look for a solution, to believe in the power of knowledge and one's own mind. Now, I was applying those lessons to my own life, and they were working. Atascadero was bathed in the evening sun. My house, my fortress, stood firm on its foundation, and I sat on the veranda with my laptop, creating something new that would outlive me and perhaps help new generations of children to love math as much as I did.